long ago, in a kingdom filled with grandeur and splendor, there lived a young girl named Cinderella. Her childhood had once been full of warmth and love, but everything changed the day her mother fell ill and passed away. Her father, a wealthy merchant, did his best to care for her. But as the years went by, he grew lonely. In time, he remarried a woman named Lady Tremaine, a widow with 2 daughters of her own, Anastasia and Drizella. Cinderella, longing for a family again, welcomed them with an open heart. She hoped to find a new mother in Lady Tremaine, and sisters in Anastasia and Drizella. But happiness was short-lived. As soon as her father left on an extended journey, Lady Tremaine revealed her true nature. No longer needing to keep up the facade of kindness, she dismissed the household servants and forced Cinderella to take on all their duties. "You must make yourself useful, child," Lady Tremaine said coldly. "From now on, you will handle the household chores." Cinderella's world changed overnight. She scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and cleaned every inch of the house, while her stepsisters indulged in luxuries, fine dresses, music lessons, and extravagant feasts. If she ever dared to complain, Lady Tremaine would only smirk and say, "You should be grateful to have a roof over your head." Her only comfort came from the small animals that scurried around the house, mice that nibbled on crumbs in the kitchen, birds that nested by her attic window, and an old scruffy cat that curled up beside her at night. Despite her hardships, Cinderella held on to hope. "One day things will change," she whispered to herself, but deep down, a part of her feared that her suffering would never end. One bright morning, the kingdom stirred with excitement. Trumpets blared in the streets as a royal messenger rode through town, calling out an important announcement. "By order of His Majesty, the King, a grand ball shall be held at the royal palace. The prince seeks a bride, and all young maidens of the kingdom are invited to attend." The news spread like wildfire. Lady Tremaine and her daughters were ecstatic. "Imagine," Drizella squealed, "the prince could choose me as his wife." "No, he will choose me," Anastasia countered, glaring at her sister. Cinderella's heart swelled with longing. A ball, an evening of music, laughter, and elegance. If only she could go just for one night and forget about the life she was forced to endure. Gathering her courage, she approached her stepmother. "May I attend the ball as well?" she asked hesitantly. Lady Tremaine regarded her with a calculating expression before her lips curled into a false smile. "Why, of course, my dear," she said. "If you finish all your chores and find something suitable to wear, you may go." Cinderella knew this was a trap. Her stepmother would surely overwhelm her with work, leaving her no time to prepare. But she refused to let despair take hold. That evening, as her stepsisters excitedly planned their outfits, Cinderella searched through an old trunk in the attic. She found a gown that had once belonged to her mother, delicate though slightly worn. With the help of her small animal friends, she carefully mended it, stitching lace and ribbons to restore its beauty. When the evening of the ball arrived, Cinderella slipped into her dress. It was simple compared to her stepsister's extravagant gowns, but it was elegant in its own way. She descended the stairs, her heart pounding with excitement. But the moment Anastasia and Drizella saw her, their faces twisted with jealousy. "You can't be serious," Drizella scoffed. "That dress, it's hideous," Anastasia sneered. Before Cinderella could react, They lunged at her, tearing at the fabric, ripping off the ribbons and the lace, until her beautiful gown was nothing but shreds. Lady Tremaine watched from the doorway, her cold smile never fading. "What a pity," she said, feigning sympathy. "It seems you have nothing to wear after all." As the front door slammed behind them, leaving Cinderella alone in the empty house, she sank to the floor, sobbing. Her dream had been crushed in an instant. Cinderella fled to the garden, where she collapsed onto a stone bench beneath an old tree. Her body trembled with silent sobs as she looked up at the sky. The stars glittered above her, indifferent to her sorrow. "Why?" she whispered. "Why is happiness always out of reach?" At that moment, a warm glow surrounded her. A soft, melodic voice spoke. "My dear child, why do you cry?" Cinderella gasped and turned to see an elderly woman standing before her. She had silver hair and kind eyes that sparkled like stardust. Who are you?" The woman smiled. "I am your fairy godmother, my dear." She twirled her fingers, and in an instant a shimmering wand appeared in her hand. "And I believe it's time to grant you a wish." Cinderella wiped her tears. "A wish?" Indeed. The fairy godmother tapped the ground with her wand, and suddenly a nearby pumpkin swelled and transformed into a magnificent golden carriage. Mice scurried forward, their tiny bodies stretching and shifting until they became elegant white horses. Cinderella watched in awe as the fairy godmother flicked her wand again. Her torn dress shimmered, the rags dissolving into fine silk. Layers of silver and blue fabric cascaded around her, and delicate glass slippers formed on her feet, catching the moonlight. She touched the dress in disbelief. "This is real." The fairy godmother chuckled. "Oh, my dear, magic is as real as you believe it to be." Then her expression turned serious. "But remember, this spell will only last until midnight. When the clock strikes 12, everything will return to how it was." Cinderella nodded, her heart pounding. "Then I will make the most of tonight." With a wave of the fairy godmother's hand, the carriage door opened. Cinderella stepped inside, feeling like she was stepping into a dream. "Now go, my dear," the fairy godmother said warmly, "and enjoy your night." As the horses galloped toward the palace, Cinderella felt a sense of hope she had not known in years. Tonight she was not a servant. Tonight she was free. As Cinderella's carriage approached the royal palace, she felt her heart race. The castle stood tall against the night sky, its towers glowing in the moonlight. Music drifted through the air, a melody so enchanting that it seemed to beckon her inside. The guards at the grand entrance bowed as she stepped onto the marble steps, mistaking her for nobility. As she entered the ballroom, all eyes turned to her. Gasps filled the air. "Who is she?" whispered one noble woman. "I've never seen her before," said another. Even Lady Tremaine and her daughters, though unaware of Cinderella's true identity, stared in disbelief at the breathtaking stranger. At the far end of the ballroom, the prince stood in conversation with his father, the king. The moment he caught sight of Cinderella, he stopped mid-sentence. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen, graceful, poised, and radiating a quiet beauty that no extravagant gown could manufacture. Without hesitation, he crossed the room and bowed. "My lady," he said, extending his hand, "would you honor me with a dance?" Cinderella hesitated, but as soon as their hands touched, she felt warmth spread through her chest. The music swelled, and together they stepped onto the dance floor. The entire room watched in awe as they moved in perfect harmony, as if they had been dancing together all their lives. For Cinderella, time seemed to stand still. The prince was kind and charming, but more than that, he looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. No one had ever seen her before, not truly, but he did. They danced and laughed, speaking of dreams and adventures, of the world beyond the palace walls. For the first time in years, Cinderella felt like herself again, not a servant, not a girl covered in ash, but simply free. But then, bong, the clock struck 11:30. A cold wave of panic rushed through her veins. She had only 30 minutes left. I have to go," she stammered, pulling away. The prince looked surprised. "But the night has only begun." "I'm sorry." Her heart ached, but she turned and ran before he could stop her. Cinderella fled through the grand hallways, her breath ragged as the clock struck 11:50. She descended the palace steps in a rush, her glass slippers clicking against the stone. "Wait," the prince called from behind her, but she did not dare turn back. As she neared the final step, her foot slipped. She caught herself, but in the moment of imbalance, one of her glass slippers fell from her foot and landed on the stairs. The prince reached the bottom just in time to see her step into the golden carriage. Bong, 12 o'clock. In an instant, the carriage, the horses, her gown, everything vanished. Cinderella found herself standing in the middle of the empty street, dressed once more in her tattered dress, barefoot, her hair undone. She gasped, looking around, but the palace guards had only seen a carriage disappear into the night. The prince, still standing on the stairs, picked up the delicate glass slipper and held it tightly. His mind was set. "I will find her," he vowed. The very next morning, the prince sent out a royal decree. "The young woman who fits the lost glass slipper shall be my bride." He and his men traveled across the kingdom, visiting every noble house. One by one, women tried to force their feet into the slipper, but none of them succeeded. When they arrived at Lady Tremaine's estate, Anastasia and Drizella eagerly shoved their feet into the shoe. Drizella gritted her teeth and pushed with all her might, while Anastasia nearly toppled over in the effort. But the slipper did not fit either of them. Lady Tremaine, standing behind them, suddenly tensed when she saw Cinderella step forward. "What about her?" the prince's servant asked. Lady Tremaine's smile was thin, her voice falsely sweet. "Oh, she's just a servant. She couldn't possibly have been at the ball." But the prince's man shook his head. "Every maiden must try." Cinderella sat down, her hands trembling. The glass slipper was placed on her foot, and it fit perfectly. A gasp filled the room. Lady Tremaine's face turned pale, and her daughter's jaws dropped in horror. The prince himself stepped forward, his eyes filled with recognition and something even deeper, relief. "It's you," he whispered. "I knew I'd find you." Cinderella smiled. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid to be seen. Not long after, Cinderella was brought to the palace, where the prince placed the second glass slipper on her other foot. That very evening, he asked for her hand in marriage. Her answer was simple: yes. And so, Cinderella, the girl who had lived in ashes, became the future queen. She forgave her stepmother and stepsisters, though they were sent away from the royal court, no longer able to mistreat anyone else. As she stood on the palace balcony, gazing at the stars that had once been her only companions, Cinderella realized that her mother had been right all along. Dreams do come true. The end.